right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Fearcast. This is the podcast dedicated to OCD and anxiety spectrum disorders and getting your life back. I'm your host, Kevin Foss, and I'm a licensed therapist specializing in OCD and anxiety disorders. And thank you all so much for joining me for this episode today. For those of you who are new to the podcast, this is a question and answer based podcast. You can send me a question about OCD and anxiety or whatever else, and I'll be happy to read it and consider it and likely put it up in a future episode, as I am doing today. So there are a lot of ways to send your question. Today's question was sent in the old-fashioned way over at fearcastpodcast.com. You click on the submit a question button, you send me your question, I read it, you get the idea. Now, there are two other ways to do this, and we've done a little bit of this in the past couple weeks. So if you have a question that you want to go to tippity top of the list, the next recording, the fastest available turnaround time, you can go to fearcastpodcast.com, and you can click on the button on the upper right of the page. It says start recording. Anyways, do an audio recording, send in your question that way. You can also go over to Instagram. I am Fearcast Podcast over there. Send me a DM, press the little microphone button, record your audio there. You can record on your phone and email it to questions@fearcastpod. There are a lot of ways to get your question in, and if you have an audio question, you get preferential treatment. But today's question is coming from Alan, and Alan's question, I think, is a good one, and I'm going to be honest. It's frustrating. It's frustrating because it has to do with AI stuff, so artificial intelligence. I think y'all know what AI means by now, right? But I have a very contentious relationship with AI. I'll explain in a little bit. But I think today's question is going to be an interesting one as we're kind of progressing further and further into an AI world. I'll be interested to hear what future me has to say about this episode in like 10 years. So I'm sure future me will either be frustrated with myself that I'm such a Luddite, or will I'll be dead because the robots have killed us. Either way, it will be interesting to see what happens. But I'll get into that. Why don't I get into that? Why don't I get into that question right now? I have nothing really at the top to share. All I know is the weather is starting to get a little colder. I mean, a little colder. It's still like 90 degrees in Southern California, and I would prefer it to not be, but y'all know I can complain about anything, and usually it's going to be the weather-related stuff. So, all right, why don't we just jump into this? No, I'm going to share one more thing. I challenged myself recently. So I'll be honest. So y'all know I have a podcast, and I've been doing this for 7 years, and this is episode 244 plus a bunch of Phobia Friday ones that I did a while ago that I did not count in the regular order of things. So one would think I'm pretty comfortable doing podcasts. I am not. I'm not when it comes to other people's podcasts. So today I was interviewed to be on a different podcast, and it was so uncomfortable. It was so anxiety provoking for me. It's, all the thoughts, right? Well, am I going to say it right? Is this the right audience to understand things? Am I going to share not enough information? Am I going to share too much information? Am I just going to say it right? Or am I just going to go totally left field and just say random crazy stuff? Like, all this stuff was flowing through my head. And, I prepped for it as I typically would. We were talking about Real-Event OCD. Interestingly, that's what we're talking about today from Alan's question. But all these fears were flowing through my head, and I've been nervous about it. We did the interview, and guess what happened, y'all? Nothing. Nothing crazy happened. Nothing crazy happened at all. It was a regular conversation. Do I wish I could go back and say things differently? Maybe. Would it be better than what I said? Maybe. But the point is, my predictive brain trying to predict the future of what was going to happen and all the terrible stuff was wrong, because none of it happened. All the prep that I did was useless because we basically went off script for the entire time. So what was the point? What was the point of my putting all that effort in to freak myself out, to listen to my own anxiety? It didn't really get me that far. It didn't help me that much. So, food for thought, I suppose, that, I should be listening to what I say on this podcast as well. And my encouragement to all of you is, as I say take a risk and don't take your brain too seriously. I should also not take my brain too seriously. All right, let's get on to Alan's question for real. All right, Alan says, "Hi, Kevin. I'm a journalist and suffer from OCD, more specifically real-event OCD and false memory OCD." And they say, "I think." All right. "When I started my job, I was using an AI rephrasing tool on my own written text to help me rephrase or tweak my writing. But eventually, I started to feel guilty about using it and decided to stop. Months later, I realized that we had our own AI policy against publishing AI content from scratch. And although my use is different, I still feel really ashamed of myself. A few weeks ago, I mentioned this to my editor about my using the AI tool, and his guidance was more strict than the written policy. Although I've reached out to multiple journalism ethics boards about my dilemma, and they have said I haven't done anything wrong and should be proud of my stories where I used the AI tool, I continue to be rattled with guilt. Ironically, using ChatGPT and other AI chatbots to help supplement the therapy I receive, but I worry it's making me worse." So it goes on to say, Now I'm worried every time I write something that I've done something wrong, or I'm continuing to spiral if I use other tools to help me with my grammar, etc. Even making up memories of supposed issues using or during my writing process, where deep down I know they aren't true. As a longtime podcast listener, I would love, or I was wondering if you'd have any guidance on how I can learn to move forward, because I want to be proud of my work, because I believe I'm a good journalist. Thank you. All right, Alan, this is a great question. I'm so sorry to hear that you're having to fight through all this, and it's frustrating. So I'm with you on that. So let's just kind of go through a couple of things in this, y'all. So as many of y'all know, real-event OCD and kind of false memory OCD is kind of like, it's kissing cousin, which is a super weird term, y'all, kissing cousin. I don't need to be kissing any of my cousins, frankly, and I think they would prefer me not doing that too, but it's a weird term. All right. So anyways, it's all right. The real-event OCD. So real-event OCD and false memory OCD, subtypes of OCD. Real-event, typically speaking, has to do with something that actually happened, right? So a precipitating event happened, and then the rumination is about what's going to roll out from that, what's going to be the consequences from that, right? So compulsions can be about trying to figure out the nature of the offense, how intense was it, and then playing out in the future, what are the consequences to it, and then how can I avoid doing those things, right? False memory is going to be about trying to figure out whether or not the memory you have is true or false. Because if it's true, we got to do something about it. If it's false, who cares, right? But if it's true, usually whatever that false memory is terrifying, right? So it's kind of like false memory can lead into real event. It's all ruminating about the past and ruminating about things and wasting way too much time to try to figure something out and raking yourself over the coals about it. So Alan, this certainly fits kind of into that, and kind of reflecting on the fact that you did use an AI rephrasing tool on your written text, right? So I think it's important to recognize. So for anybody who's kind of unaware of this, there's some software out there where you can take what you wrote, take an article that you wrote or an essay or whatever, and put it into this thing, and it will consider it and look through it and then kind of make some suggestions on what will make it tighter, sound better, sound smarter, sound more colloquial. It can make all these adjustments to it that can be a helpful tool along the way, right? Now, there's certainly that, but there's also that spectrum of things where you're inserting into the system your own article, and then it's kind of making tweaks and tightening things up. It's like an AI editor, I suppose you can consider that, right? So that's on a spectrum then to the other side of it, where you're putting in a prompt, hey, ChatGPT, I would love to have an article about, I don't know, trees and whether or not they are hearing what you say and care about that. And then AI or ChatGPT spits out a whole article with citations, some of which are fake. A whole article about that, and people are claiming it as their own. All right, so I think there is a spectrum of this, and whether or not, it doesn't even matter. All right, point is, so your question is, how do you start getting past this? Well, all right, so with all manner of OCD, one of the most important things that we need to do is to identify what compulsions you're doing. Right. So, Alan, I'm curious about what compulsions you find yourself doing. Are you ruminating about this? It sounds like there's a little bit of reassurance seeking, but I wonder how far it went, right? Because I think it's reasonable to a certain degree to have one and done reassurances. If you have questions about something that you don't have an answer to, well, we look it up, right? We're not expected to know everything, right? So if there's a question about, ethics, you can certainly message your ethics board. If you have questions, about, work policies, certainly ask HR, ask your boss, ask someone who's in the know. Right? We don't want to ask, someone at a whole other company what the policy is for your company, right? We don't want to ask, I don't know, can't come up with a great comparison at the moment, but we want to ask people who are in the know and who would have some type of authority to that bit of information, right? So that's great, and we call that kind of one and done, right? Now, I know there are circumstances where you might need to ask two, or it would be helpful to ask two people, but we start to make excuses in that, and then it starts to go and go and go, and now you're just asking for reassurances, right? So it's that fine line of how far into it before now you already have the information, but now you're trying to satisfy the feeling, right? That's where it gets into that like 4-letter word sort of reassurance. So I have no problem with you asking the people that you ask. I think the question then is going to be: Are you still ruminating about what they said? Did you write notes, and are you rereading what they said to kind of give yourself that reassurance? But to you, it might feel like it's getting sure of it, like really being sure and confident, and building your confidence in it. Right? We make those excuses for our anxiety when in reality, we're not going to get any more information from it, right? It's not like after you've read it once or let's say twice, it's, all of a sudden now just going to fit and you're going to understand everything, right? Anxiety and OCD doesn't let you off the hook that easily. So you need to intentionally be limiting yourself and policing yourself in what you're doing and how much information, and being honest with yourself about the actions you're taking to gather this information, whether or not it is compulsive or you're asking a question and trying to seek information that you haven't asked before. All right. So I think you get the idea, Alan. So I wonder if there's, any compulsion going on there, any reassurance seeking, rereading what you did, comparing the AI results to what you wrote, etc. So we first need to catch what the compulsions are and start slowly limiting and eliminating them, right? So as you're attempting to try to move past this, as you asked, there's that the compulsions are one of those things that's going to be holding you in place and preventing you from moving forward, right? Because we ultimately do compulsions, and compulsions are things that typically people don't like to do. They don't want to do them, but they feel like they have to do them in order to move forward, or in order to let themselves off the hook finally, or to feel better about themselves, right? So by loosening your grip on compulsions, by letting go of this event and this thing that you had done, you are going to be you're giving yourself the opportunity to move forward rather than continuing to revisit that thought. So that's one of the ways that you can continue to move forward. Another part of that would be how you're addressing this guilt, right? Now, we've talked about guilt and shame in the past, right? Guilt is that bad feeling when you've done something, quote, bad, and shame is that bad feeling when you believe you are something bad, right? Sometimes with errors and mistakes, and especially within Real-Event, we can shame ourselves and beat ourselves up over and over and over again. We can beat ourselves up and believe that it reflects some sort of core sense of failing, core mistakes, and in a sense, when we buy into this idea that we are inherently broken, we don't let ourselves off the hook, right? We kind of hold ourselves to that, and it doesn't help us to move forward, right? Shifting that language from shame into guilt is going to be an important step here, right? And I hear that as well in what you're doing. You're kind of saying like, I recognize that I did this, or you said, you know that you did it, and there's kind of this acknowledgement that, or it sounds as if you are no longer doing it. So there was an attempt to make a change to what you did. And what that is ultimately recognizing that, shame holds us to, I am this bad thing, and therefore anything I do is bad. But when we think about guilt says, well, I did something I regret. I did something that I wish I didn't do. It violated a value, or it went against something I believe to be true or believe to be right. And to a certain degree, we should have that bad feeling, right? It helps get us back on track with, our values and all that. But what we do is we acknowledge what we did, what we'd rather do, what we quote should have done, right? What we could do within our values, and then we make a commitment to staying on track with our values and preventing ourselves resisting the urge to fall back into old patterns or fall back into making that same mistake in a future similar situation. So, if you are committed to not using this AI rephrasing tool, that's great, and that's certainly up to you. But since it sounds like your ethics, the journalism ethics boards are kind of saying it's fine. I'd be interested to find out what your boss said or what your editor said about that and how that's different. But if you're saying, all right, you did this and you're trying not to do it in the future, great, that's certainly your choice. But acknowledge then that you are doing something different. Right? It doesn't need to be an everyday thing. It doesn't need to be compulsively said or said right or whatever it is. It's like, what? I'm moving forward with this. And maybe my articles aren't going to be as tight or as clean or as punchy or as whatever, right? They're not going to be as blank, but they're going to be my writings. And that's where you said, this is who I am. This is my writing. And as you said, you think you're a good journalist, right? So being proud of the work that you do also comes with the praise that you give the work that you do. How do you talk about your current work as it is, right? Are you saying, I do good work. I like this. I like the article. I like this bit really specifically, or I like the way it worked out this way, or I like that, how it formed or came. I don't know. You get what I'm saying, right? How you talk about something speaks to the way you feel about it, right? If we criticize and beat up and tear down and rip apart something that we're doing, that's what we're seeing, right? We're looking for its faults and its problems, right? So, Alan, one thing I would challenge you to do in the effort to work on being proud of your work is to go through it and to really talk about what is important to you, what's good about it, what you like about it, what you think makes it good journalism, right? And that's, I think, one of the ways that you can help to build that confidence that you do good work and that you can start to feel good about the work that you're doing. But one of the things you also mention here, kind of rereading your question, you said, now I'm worried every time I write something that I've done something wrong and continue to spiral, if I use other tools to help me with my grammar. Right. So I don't know if this is a sense of false guilt in the sense that, it sounds like you are continuing to use tools, but I don't know if those are the AI tools or if that's a thesaurus you're using or if that's, asking a friend or, something else. Right. And I think that kind of falls. So this can be one of two things. It can be one of many things, frankly, but is this that thing where you're talking about where on the one hand, it could be, if you're dedicated to no longer using an AI rephrasing tool, You're deciding not to do that, but there continues to be residual guilt, right? That's where we want to call that out as false guilt. That's a false alarm within that guilt system, right? Because it's going off even though you've acknowledged that you made a mistake. You've acknowledged that you're doing something different and you're committing to doing something different, right? So if you're continuing to get that feeling, that's where, again, we need to make space for that feeling. Call it out for what it is, right? This is false guilt. But then we don't need to do anything else other than acknowledge it, make space for it, compassionately welcome that feeling and say, you can be here for as long as you want, but I'm not changing or doing anything different than what I'm currently doing because this is just my false guilt, right? Now, you did say that you were using other tools, and you're worried that if you're using those tools, it can spike your anxiety, or you're going to start to kind of spiral or somehow get worse. Or no, getting worse is related to something else. But I think for that, being really honest with yourself about the tool that you're using and whether or not it fits within your value system of what you're trying to do, right? If it is something that absolutely fits and is fine, then we need to acknowledge that this is anxiety trying to pull you back in and make these false equivalencies, right? Saying that, the tool that you're using to help with your grammar is as, quote, as bad as the AI rephrasing tool or as bad as ChatGPT. All right, so let me just talk briefly about ChatGPT when it comes to OCD treatment. Now, there are a lot of folks out there who are using ChatGPT for OCD and anxiety treatment. There are a lot of people who are using it for a lot of different reasons. I am a slow adopter to it because I don't trust robots. And I don't trust robots. There's a lot of other things I can say about that, but a lot of people are using ChatGPT for some things. I've talked to folks where they are, they're putting their situation into ChatGPT and asking it to produce a bunch of cognitive distortions, or to ask it to help challenge some of the cognitive distortions that they're experiencing. I've talked with folks I've met folks where they've put in a prompt and ChatGPT has written their anxiety script for them, and I've been told they can be really, really good, right? I've even been told that ChatGPT, as it starts to get to know you, and I think you have to tell it this, but it will start to catch on that you're asking the same question. And if it knows you have OCD, it will tell you, hey, it sounds like you're doing a compulsion, right? Which is great, right? But I think so there can be some great tools for it, right? There can be, I think one of the ways that you can use ChatGPT a really good way. So, for example, scripting, right? It can produce a script for you, and having someone else write it can have a different effect on you. It's not necessarily for everybody, for all situations, but it can hit your anxiety a little bit harder or differently in that way. So that's one way you can do it. You can use it to produce like a list of exposures you can do, right? You can say like, hey, I'm afraid of, I have harm OCD, and I'd like a list of exposures related to knives, and it can produce a bunch of potential exposure ideas, right? So for someone who doesn't have access to a therapist or therapy, or someone who wants to supplement with this, that can be a really helpful tool to do that, or to is really helpful supplement to your treatment. But I really want to caution people when using it is that ChatGPT is not another human who is going to pick up on the subtleties of OCD and the subtleties of reassurance, the subtleties of what makes a good and ethical exposure. It's very possible ChatGPT is going to produce a list of exposures that are actually going to be unhelpful for you. So what I would encourage you to do if you're wanting to do ChatGPT and other AI bots as a supplement is use it as a supplement and not as a guide, right? So talk with your therapist about the use of these tools and whether or not it'd be helpful in your specific case. And, put a prompt in, print it out, bring it to your therapist and say, let's talk about this. What if this would be helpful? What if this would be unhelpful? And see if that actually does really help or if it's kind of problematic. right? So I think that's one of the ways to start considering this. And I have someone on staff who's going to come out with an article, kind of a longer sort of guide about how to best use ChatGPT and AI in treatment. So I think we need to put guidelines around this or guidances around this, so it's not just slowly taken over or directing you in an odd way. I think that's more specifically what I'm trying to say to that. All right. So I know this is kind of a shorter episode, but Alan, I hope some of this was helpful in kind of giving you an idea about what you can do. Again, number one, we want to cut out the compulsions that you're doing. I really am going to encourage you to cut out any negative criticism, shame that you're providing on yourself. Make a decision as to what fits within your value system, your value system regarding the use of AI and AI tools for your work, for your journalism. And lastly, be positive and encouraging with yourself when it comes to the work that you do. Show yourself that the work you do is good, is valuable, and is worthwhile, and that you are worthwhile in the work that you do. So, all right, to everybody else out there, I hope this was helpful to you. But until next time, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Fearcast. If you would like your question answered on a future episode, please click on the Submit a Question link at fearcastpodcast.com. If you would like your question answered sooner, please send me a recording of your question to questions@fearcastpodcast.com or by sending me an audio message through Instagram by DMing me at fearcastpodcast on Instagram. If you like the Fearcast, please write a review on your podcast platform of choice. Please remember that the Fearcast is not a substitute for psychotherapy. If you need a little bit of help in your recovery, please go over to fearcastpodcast.com and click on the Find Help link, and there's going to be some information for you there. So until next time, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously. Bye.